from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez, America's favorite late-night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media. Welcome to the Thursday night edition of our program. If you want to join us on our late night national town hall conversation, give me a call, 833-482-5337-833-4-Valdez. And it's always a pleasure to be with you guys. I'm in a very grateful mood today, very thankful mood. I wanted to just reiterate that. I know oftentimes we put our best foot forward into life each day, right? And some days are better than others. Some days are rougher than others. Different days have different challenges. Some days we have good news. Literally, I mean, like a lot of news in the news cycle. Lots for me to talk about. And other days we don't. But one thing remains the same is that sometimes when things are going good for anybody, you, me, our nation, our economy, or when things are going not so good, you can get caught in either one of those situations looking at the glass as half empty. And I just want to submit to you, I have to remind myself of this very often to make sure I start looking at the glass as half full. Sometimes it's worth taking a pause and looking around and saying, you know what? There's so much for me to be thankful for. And I don't mean just the basics, like you can see, you can hear, and if you can't see and hear, I understand that those are challenges that you're facing. But I know I can see, I can hear. These are the things I'm thankful for. And it goes beyond that. Good health, weight loss, whatever it may be. But there's also all the opportunities, all the cool things that I get to do. I get to come on this radio every day and speak with you and have a conversation with you, right? You guys get to call in and we have this national conversation about the issues of the day. And I never take that lightly. That is always something that's impressed heavily upon me because I realize, A, not everybody gets to do it, and B, the importance of it. Right? There's so much that goes on in a given day. And we have a chance here on Rich Valdez, America at Night. We have a chance here to do it before a lot of other people do. Right? As things are unfolding at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, we get to talk about what's going on in America during the day, during the night. And other radio programs that are early morning or midday won't get to it till tomorrow. Right, so I always remind myself, I'm very grateful, I'm very blessed, and I'm very thankful to each and every one of you to listen to this program, to participate in the program, and to help make this country a little bit better is my goal, right? And I think it's your goal too. Anyway, there's an old movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and that's my play on words tonight. I'm going to talk about Mr. Trump Goes to Washington, right? El Trompito made a triumphant return to Capitol Hill, and it was pretty cool to see him there. He hasn't been there since January 6th, and we have a little bit of the audio from that. I don't have the full remarks, but I'm going to try and give you some snippets of what El Trompito Donaldus Magnus, the 45th president, had to say when he met with Republican members of Congress. Listen to this.
This was a great meeting. There's tremendous unity in the Republican Party. We want to see borders. We want to see strong military. We want to see money not wasted all over the world. We don't want to see Russian ships right off the coast of Florida, which is what they are right now. That's unthinkable. We want to see just success for our country. And we don't have success right now. We have inflation that's killing everybody. We have levels of inflation that nobody's seen for, they say 42 years, they say 53 years, and they say 75 years. I would say probably all of them are wrong. Probably we've never seen levels like this before. And we're going to end that. We're going to bring back our jobs. We're going to bring back common sense to government. We're going to have strong borders, and we're going to have people come into our country, but they're going to come in legally. They're not going to pour in from prisons all over South America and all over the world. And it's not just South America, by the way. It's all over the world. And we're not going to have them pour in from mental institutions, which is where they're coming from, large numbers, and large numbers are terrorists. And we're not going to have this.
That's El Trompito Donaldus Magnus, the 45th president of these United States. Now, President Trump was in D.C. His arch nemesis, who I like to call Joe El Baboso Biden, was not, just a couple of blocks away at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. No, he was in Italy today at the G7 summit, and he was there, talking about all the great things that he's doing for other countries and how he's not going to use the weapons that he's been using in Ukraine inside of Russia and all that, which is why we have these warships that President Trump was alluding to. And it's interesting to me to just see the contrast, the differences between these two men. And Trump was impeached for telling Zelensky, look, for trying to get some assurances, right? He wanted to make sure that they were going to do the right thing with the supplies that they were asking for and that were going to be sent. Yeah, Biden, it's so different, right? Biden talks to Zelensky, he sits down, and I think we had some audio of it the other night. Maybe I'll play it for you later. He apologizes. I want to apologize for making the payment late, as if he's paying off a loan shark or some sort of extortionist. It's just so bizarre. And again, I support Ukraine, right? I really do. I want to see them win. I'm not a pro-Putin patriot. I'm not. I doubt I ever will be. I could care less what Putin has to say about BLM, what Putin has to say about the LGBTQ community, all these things. A lot of people saw, but he says he's not lying about this. I don't care. I really don't care what he says. Putin is a murderous dictator, thug, spy, in my opinion, and nothing's going to change that. Anyway, El Trompito, he didn't stop there. He continued, and he went on to talk about how so many world leaders are actually laughing at Biden while Biden was overseas with these said world leaders. Listen to this.
We want to make America great again. We want to make our country great again. We're a nation that's in decline. We're a declining nation. We're a nation that is being laughed at all over the world. We have a leader that's being laughed at all over the world. And we're going to turn it around. We're going to turn it around fast. The polls are looking like they're very strongly for us. And no matter where you look, in fact, a lot of states that people thought weren't in play are very strongly in play. Some were actually leading in. But we have to get elected. We have to take this beautiful place, and we have to make it really something very special. Again, right now it's not special. Right now it's being scorned and being used as an example of when they look at the crime on the streets, when they look at all of the problems that we have, they're using us as a bad example of democracy. And they're getting away with murder, and we're not going to let it happen.
That, again, President Trump in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol. Now, Biden was overseas. He's in Italy at the G7 summit. He's talking about developing a railway from Angola to the Indian Ocean. Great. Spend more money all over the place. Everywhere except at home, right? Taking care of everybody else except the Americans. Listen to Biden talking about the Indian Ocean Railway.
And we're developing the first railway line to extend from Angola to DRC, Zambia, to the Indian Ocean. I think this is a game changer. I really do. We're at a continent that's going to have over 2 billion of people very shortly.
Now, what's interesting is Biden looks slow. He looks tired. And I get it. He's traveling all over the place. He's an older guy. Although lots of people like to say, oh, he's at the same age as Trump. They're only a couple of years apart. I don't know. I just heard Trump speaking, and he sounded invigorated. He sounded spry. Biden did not. He looks very rigid. One of his arms barely moves, and he's not John McCain. And he's not Bob Dole, right? His arms are not from war injuries. This is a new thing, this rigidity that he's displaying. But what's crazy is they had this parachute demonstration, and the parachute lands right in front of him, and he kind of does an about face and takes off in the other direction. And some woman from, didn't look like she was from the American contingent, but from maybe Macron or somebody else's group, walked over to him and gently redirected him to come back. But he was doing that Easter Bunny thing again, where he's kind of shaking hands with the air and like talking to people that aren't there. It was really, just another one of those malfunctions. And it's scary because, again, I don't think he's a robot. I don't think he's fake. I don't think he has a mask on. I don't think any of those things. I think that he has serious problems in his brain, and the medication he's taking is interacting with him. And this is stuff that I've seen with my dad, who had a traumatic brain injury. And my dad would do the Easter Bunny thing. He would just, wouldn't realize where he was looking. So it didn't occur to him that he'd be looking at a wall or something. And in his head, he was reliving conversations and having memories or having flashbacks. And he would laugh and he would have these full conversations. And I'd have to like snap him out of it sometimes. Hey, Dad, you good? And he'd go, oh, yeah. And he'd tell me, I was just talking to so-and-so. And, it was heartbreaking to watch at times. But that is the reality of what occurred, at least from my experience. Anyway, we're going to get a little bit more into what Biden had to say overseas, as well as what's going on. The Supreme Court weighed in on the, I don't know how to say the name of this drug, promethazone, I think is how it's pronounced. And that was a big deal coming out of the Supreme Court today. So we're going to get to that and more. Plus, we have a guest coming up that I don't want you to miss. So don't go anywhere. The phone number, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
Well, thank you, Rich, and thank you for everything. I know you very well, and I listen, but I have a lot of people that listen, and they love your show, and I appreciate it very much.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
It was our great pleasure to host the president this morning, the 45th president, who will soon to be reelected as the 47th president. President Trump brought an extraordinary amount of energy and excitement and enthusiasm this morning. That is what we're seeing in the party throughout the country.
That's Speaker of the House Mike Johnson commenting on President Trump's visit to Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill visit today. And I want to get some reaction to that from somebody who was just with President Trump at the rally that they did in Nevada. And that's Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady. He's retired from the United States Air Force, where he was a pilot. He's flown for Federal Express. He's also was just recently a Senate candidate in Nevada. And he's the author of a book, American Values, Another Voice, A Pilot's Perspective on Living the American Dream. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on, Rich. It's an honor.
Likewise, sir. Thank you, and thank you for your service. I want to get your reaction to both what the energy has felt like on the campaign trail. Like I said, I know that you were at an event with President Trump a couple of days ago in Nevada, which is not necessarily Trump country, and it may be becoming Trump country, just like the Bronx, New York was when I went to a rally there a couple of weeks back. And I think that's part of the phenomenon that we're seeing of people just saying, enough is enough. And then weigh in on your thoughts on his visit to Capitol Hill.
Well, great. Thank you very much for asking that question. Nevada definitely is Trump country. There's a lot of people that are saying that it isn't. Of course, you look back at some other elections where he might have lost. But you focused in on what's most important, that Nevadans are hurting under the Democrat policies. Nevadans are paying $11,400 more dollars a year to maintain the same lifestyle that they had before the Democrat administration took over under Biden and rubber stamped by our Senator Jackie Rosen that's in right now. So we need to make a change. But at the rally, it was upbeat. Everybody that came to the rally didn't get in. They set up these big screens so that people who were still in line at the deadline time could see what was going on inside there. But there were folks from all over the western and northwestern United States in there. There were folks from Utah, Arizona, Washington, California, as well as Nevadans. So there was a lot of energy there. And, this is about the fifth Trump gathering that I've gone to, and there's been energy at all of them, and it keeps building.
That's the same experience I've had, and it seems to be what the polls are indicating. But, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady, when I look at politics, and I've been looking at politics for a long time, this is a very odd time of the year to be this immersed in presidential electoral politics, right? Typically this time of year, you've got primaries that are going on, and then people are kind of taking it easy until Labor Day, and then things kick into gear. That's not the case anymore. I think everybody's, minding their P's and Q's and on top of their game, making sure that things happen. And I guess it has to be that way if we're going to make the type of change that we want to make. Now, that being said, talk to me a little bit about this odd number that you just gave me, which I think is scary, how much Nevadans have to pay. But it's not too far off from what all Americans have to pay to live their lives. What's the impact that inflation has had in your neck of the woods?
It's been very bad. One of the things that people don't think about is the supply and demand of gasoline, or what I like to call hydrocarbon fuels, changes for a lot of reasons. There's market forces that force it. But in our particular situation, we have the Democrats that have limited leases to oil companies. So in the future, that's going to be a problem in terms of exploration. They've shut down Keystone Pipeline, and we're not drilling in Anwar. But part of the problem is that the European markets have spiked in terms of the fuel that they need, and long-winded way around that the demand is super high, the supply is low. So here in Nevada, we're paying upwards. It can be from $5 to $6 a gallon for gas, just because of what's happened with the supply. Unfortunately, in Nevada, we're in what you would call the refining price scheme that California is in, just because of the nature of the refinery. So this administration has spiked fuel prices, and also they put us in a tough situation because they haven't refilled the strategic petroleum oil reserve,
and keep emptying it.
Yeah, that's a problem. If we were to have a major disaster, we don't have that shock absorber. Excuse me. So so there's a lot of problems economically under these policies that the Democrats have put forth.
Folks, we're on with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady. He's retired from the United States Air Force, former test pilot. He was a candidate for the U.S. Senate in Nevada. He's flown for Federal Express as well. And he's the author of a book, American Values, Another Voice, A Pilot's Perspective on Living the American Dream. And when we come back, we're going to talk about his book. I really want to get a little bit of a biography from him, from his perspective. I want to hear about why he wrote the book. And, of course, we're going to take some of your calls as well in the following segment. 833-482-5337 is the telephone number, 833-4-VALDEZ. Don't go anywhere. We return with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady. Don't go anywhere.
The best guests, the best opinions. This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, familia, welcome back, amigos. Rich Valdez here with you till 1 a.m. Eastern time. We're doing the show live. We do it live every night across the country, 833-482-5337. I will be getting to some of your calls in about 15 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes. But I want to continue our discussion with our guest, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady. He's retired from the United States Air Force. He was a pilot, and he's the author of a book, American Values, Another Voice, A Pilot's Perspective on Living the American Dream. Tony Grady, when you were a little kid, did you think, I can't wait till I grow up, I want to fly planes, I want to be in the military, and did you envision yourself becoming a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force?
No, I didn't envision myself, but what happened, I just have to laugh because my sister, who's 4 years older, said that before I could write my ABCs, I was drawing pictures of airplanes. So, flying was imprinted on me. But that story of how I determined to become a pilot is in my book, and people really need to read it. But the short version of it is in talking a little bit about my background. Though my parents were born poor in the Jim Crow South run by Democrats, they had the opportunity through benefactors to get to college. They went to Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University.
Dad became HBCU.
Yeah, an HBCU, correct. And Dad became a vocational education professor in the vernacular shop, and my mother became an RN. But Dad taught at several HBCUs for a while and was recognized for his good work. So he was tapped to go to other countries to teach them how to set up their vocational schools, or their schools that would teach those industrial arts. And so the story of me becoming a pilot had to do with the fact that the first place we lived outside the United States was in Lagos, Nigeria, in Africa. So at 7 years old, I got to go to Africa. So on that first trip from Philadelphia, where we were hailing, I got to fly both in a propeller airplane and a jet airplane the same day. We flew from Philadelphia to New York in a prop, and then on, in a jet over to England. But during that trip, we were flying into Copenhagen, and we were actually on a Royal Dutch Airline airplane. And we were sitting in first class at the time, and the captain noticed that I was kind of interested in what was going on up there. So he invited me up and, sat me on his lap, and I'm looking at all these dials and everything. And I remember the sky being blue and the clouds being puffy white, and we banked up going into Copenhagen, and I saw at the time this sea of color, which were kind of like the tulips in bloom. And something clicked in my head, and I said, I can do this. And the book goes into a little bit more detail, but that got imprinted on me right when I was about 7 years old. And my sister said I never deviated from wanting to be a pilot. So I didn't envision myself being a lieutenant colonel, but I envisioned myself being a pilot. And of course, it was during the era of landing on the moon. So everything was pointed towards aviation and space and all those kinds of things. And I was interested in those. So that's the short story.
The book is American Values, Another Voice, a pilot's perspective on living the American dream. The author, retired Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady, United States Air Force. And as a pilot, as a kid, right, you're a 7-year-old and you're enamored with becoming a pilot. What does that look like, that period of time from 7 through college look like? How did you solidify the plan to become a pilot?
Well, what happened with my dad being in foreign service, though we lived in Africa for a while, then we came back to the United States for a little while, and then Dad got tapped to go and help Vietnam with their schools. And since that was the time of the Vietnam War, we were safe havened in Bangkok, Thailand. So from half of 6th grade through graduation of high school, I was in Bangkok, Thailand. So while I'm traveling around the world as a youth, I'm in and out of passenger jets, and then of course I see military jets. And another major factor that's in the book is that my uncle ended up being an engineer for General Electric or GE, and he was a electrical engineer, and he encouraged me to pursue engineering. So the engineering pursuit, as well as the idea that there was a space program and I wanted to be a pilot, all kind of came together. So what happened was I ended up going to the Air Force Academy. I became very patriotic when I was overseas, seeing that the United States is the best country on the face of the earth. We're not a country without problems. We have plenty of problems, but we tend to solve them, and we tend to work on those to try to solve, the ones that aren't totally solved. So I became very patriotic because I saw communism, socialism, and knew we didn't want that in the States. So that's what caused me to go to the Air Force Academy. And of course, going there was my gateway to becoming a pilot, because after graduation, I went to pilot training. So that's kind of how it looked when I was growing up.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady, what was the impact on you as an adolescent coming up, witnessing what communism was like in these countries that you were visiting?
Well, I saw what strong our governments are like. When I was in Africa, I witnessed my first coup. Didn't really understand what it was. I knew it was something bad, but didn't really understand it until many, many years later when I was in the military and actually studied those types of conflicts. I visited Hong Kong when I was a youth, and communist China was right there, and got a hold of Mao's little book, got to read Mao's little book. Of course, we had the Vietnam conflict going on. We had Cambodia, Laos, and then just to the west, we've got Burma, which is called Myanmar now. But these are oppressive types of governments. Of course, we had the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, and I saw what was happening there. And with the Vietnam War, I had some good friends whose dads were killed in Vietnam while we were there. One real close friend's dad was a colonel in the Marine Corps, and I had seen his dad, and like the next week, my friend was talking about, because his dad had been on R&R, or rest and recreation, in Thailand for a little while. His dad went back to Vietnam, and then like a few weeks later, he was leaving because his dad had been killed. So it was up close and personal to be around the war, understand what communism was. Many, many years later, when I was in a military school doing a thesis, I actually called the father of one of my friends that was a high school friend who had been a Baptist missionary in Vietnam. He had been there before the war.
Oh, wow.
But he was telling me that during the war, he was talking to a young man who was Viet Cong and had been captured. And he talked about how the young man became very disillusioned with communism because he had been in and out of the tunnels, and the young man had developed leprosy. And pretty much when he developed leprosy, the communists just discarded him. And that probably helped to contribute to his arrest and being thrown in jail. So it's just interesting listening to this pastor talk about that. And of course, as he was trying to, share with him, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and though he was in this predicament, how God valued him, as one of his children, that he was created and that sort of thing. So anyway, these types of experiences were experiences that I had. In high school, I actually had a young man in one of my math classes that was from Red China. So it's really kind of interesting talking with him. So anyway, I came up close and personal with communism and the results of it while I was growing up.
Folks, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady, retired from the U.S. Air Force. Sir, would you stick around and help us round out the rest of your story for a couple more minutes?
Oh, I would love to do that. Sure, I'll stick around, Rich.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a quick pause right here. We're going to come right back. Folks, we're live with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
glad to be on your show, Rich. It's just an amazing broadcast that I hope the rest of America listens to every day.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, familia, welcome back. We continue our conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady, retired from the U.S. Air Force. He's the author of the book, American Values, Another Voice, A Pilot's Perspective on Living the American Dream. And we've been talking about how he lived that American dream from being a kid and being exposed to different countries because his dad served in the Foreign Service and getting bit by that pilot's bug, going to the Air Force Academy, becoming a pilot. What does the rest of your journey look like from getting out of the Air Force Academy to where we are today? Walk us through.
Well, I was blessed to become a pilot, go to pilot training, become a pilot. I became a test pilot, which was my goal. I majored in astronautical engineering, and there's aspects of that fed into being able to be an expert at the goodness of how airplanes fly, and that's called flying qualities. So that was my expertise as a test pilot. I commanded the B-2 stealth bomber test squadron. So that's the squadron out at Edwards Air Force Base in California that made sure that the B-2, an experimental airplane, met its requirements. And I had the privilege of being the commander at the time that it's called finishing out the matrix. Basically, the B-2 completed its requirements, so we were able to turn it over to the folks at Whiteman Air Force Base, who would be the pilots to fly the airplane operationally. So we call that initial operation capability. So I was privileged to be the commander during that time period. Test piloting is very dangerous, but I know that your audience wants airmen to have the best equipment that they possibly can. So test pilots go out there and make sure that the theoretical actually happens. You know, we're never perfect on that, but we need to make sure that the requirements are met. So that was a $24 billion program. I also had the privilege of, I just want to state that not only did I command the squadron, but I actually flew test flights in the airplane. Sometimes people get confused with that. They think that because I was the commander, I wasn't testing the airplane, but I was actively testing the airplane with the rest of the pilots in my squadron and managing the program with the engineers that were quite excellent at what they did. I also had the privilege of working in the Pentagon. I was the president's bomber expert, so I worked on appropriations bills that would have what we call force structure, or the stuff that the Air Force would need in the future in terms of its hardware and manning and how we would fund different things like that. So I worked on that, and that was my 20-year career. I ended up flying 47 different airplanes. The B-2 was my last.
47? Come on.
Yeah, I had about 5,000 hours. So, wow. You know, after the Air Force, I flew for FedEx for 20 years. And during that time period, I started my own biotech company that I ran for 11 years, found out what government regulations can do to small startup companies. So I understand that. But, you know, during all this time, I had a wonderful wife. And one thing that I'd like your audience to know is that we have 4 kids. And though I went to the Air Force Academy, you know, kids generally don't listen. All parents will tell you that. But the joke is that mine didn't listen because my oldest went to Annapolis and the baby went to West Point. So, wow. You know, they didn't listen. And in between there, we have one that was a molecular biologist who ended up teaching school, and another one who's been running a personal training company. But I just like to mention them because my wife was a trooper. She, you know, raised those kids, and I mean, we raised them together, but we all know that mommy's number one and daddy's somewhere around 10, you know, kind of thing. But in the reality, we homeschooled through 8th grade, or I should say she homeschooled them through 8th grade, and then we put them in the high school. We experienced public school and private Christian school. So we're experienced in lots of forms of education. I'm very, very proud of my, you know, my children going off
As
and
you should be.
contributing to society. Yeah. So
Let me
that's
ask you.
that's kind of it. Yeah. So
I
yeah.
wanted to ask you about this biotech company. What was the nature of that, the gist of that? And it seems like you were enthusiastic about getting in, but also a kind of eye-opening experience upon getting out. Tell us more.
Well, I kind of had my head handed to me. I put my capital at risk and found out what happens when you do that, Rich. So I learned a lot of things. But the company was based on using nanotechnology in the biotech space. We were trying to make small medical devices or improve parts of medical devices to augment the minimal to non-invasive surgery space. And if any of your folks in the audience are familiar with a company called Given Imaging, they were the first to put a camera in a pill that you swallow to image the small intestine. And they had a slight problem that when the pill got in the large intestine, since it was sized for the small intestine, would tumble. So the first project we were working on was to try to stabilize that pill. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we were doing.
And you ran into issues with red tape?
We ran into a lot of issues. I mean, yeah, the red tape was one of them, but it was kind of the red tape that related to eventually what we were going to have to do with human trials, certain red tape and other things. Funding was a big issue in terms of that, and finding the right people with the skill set to be able to help pull it off. So we thought we had about a 5-year window to be able to perfect what we were doing, and it ended up being about 11-year window. But in the final analysis, because of certain things that we had to deal with, the Japanese actually beat us to a prototype.
Oh man!
So that's kind of the short story of how the company went. So.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us and sharing your story. I think it was a remarkable story. It really is, like your book, The American Dream. And again, the book is American Values, Another Voice, a pilot's perspective on living the American dream. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady, retired from the U.S. Air Force. I want to thank you for being with us. You are a gentleman, a scholar, and a patriot, sir.
Well, thank you for having me, Rich, and your audience can know they can find the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So if they're interested, they can go there and find out more about me.
I encourage them to get 2 copies, one for themselves and one to give away. Thank you, sir. Godspeed.
And to you. Thank you for having me, Rich. Have a good evening.
We'll do it again soon. All right, amigos, we're coming right back with your calls and more. 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, with seconds to go before hour number 2, we go to Nick in La Crosse, Wisconsin on WIZM. Nick, quickly, go right ahead.
Okay, I just want to know who you think that Mr. Trump should pick for a vice presidential nominee.
Sure. Who do you think?
I like Tim Scott, but there's a lot of others. I just want to know how you felt about it.
Sure. Yeah, I've been pretty vocal, I think, on this. I like Congressman Byron Donalds. He's not really even in the running. I think he's maybe on the somewhat short list, but I do think he is the best candidate that would do the best job as VP, just given his experience in Congress and everything like that. And he's just a fighter. Of course, there's the issue of both of them being from Florida, so they can lose those electoral college votes, and that's a consideration we'd have to make. But I think 2 guys from New York that are transplanted to Florida sounds like a winning team to me. Thanks for the call. Coming right back, hour number 2, Rich Valdez.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez, America's favorite late night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media. Your liberty-loving Latino amigo, happy to be here with you this Thursday evening. We're live, we're national, and we welcome your calls. 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. And a quick rundown on some of the headlines we're looking at. President Trump made a visit to Capitol Hill to meet with House Republicans. We'll get into that a little bit more as we move on in the next hour. But President Biden was in Italy for a G7 meeting. He had a bunch of things to say. One of the things that he reiterated today was his support for his son, Hunter Biden. Listen to this.
I'm extremely proud of my son, Hunter. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know, and I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Okay, lot said there. He says he's not going to pardon him. I think later he says he also wouldn't commute his sentence. So interesting stuff. But is Hunter Biden one of the brightest guys he knows? Well, some would argue no, because he's in all these federal indictments on tax issues and on gun charges. But others might argue absolutely yes, because he made, I don't know, I think it was $1 billion or more than $1 billion with all this money he made and these deals he cut and all these businesses he really doesn't know much about. And this is a guy who had to leave the Army because of his addiction issues. So I would say I ain't going to call him stupid. That's for sure. I think Hunter Biden is a smart guy, and he's definitely getting over on a lot of people. Anyway, that was his thoughts on him. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. Then there's more and more climate change issues. The Pentagon has a plan to fight climate change, and the way they're going to do it is they're going to put Chinese-made solar panels on the roof of the Pentagon. How about that? How about that for a genius idea? Put Chinese technology on top of our Department of Defense. Anyway, that's part of what we're talking about, and we're going to get into a lot more later. We've had some discussions on the American dream, and I want to shift to a story that is interesting to me, right? And, you know, I don't do sports, right? Sports is not my thing. I don't know much about sports. Grew up riding my bike, watching boxing, watching wrestling, professional wrestling, and watching UFC, and those are the things that I'm into. But I know there's a ton of you listening right now that love it when they preempt me for one of the sports ball games. And we'll talk about that later. But Pat McAfee is a sports commentator, and he's been catching some flack because he referred to Caitlin Clark as a white B-word. And we have an audio clip of that. I want you to listen to this.
What the WNBA currently has is what we like to describe as a cash cow. There is a superstar. And we're not saying that the players on the court need to act any differently. That's the athletes are going to do what athletes are going to do in any sport. And I think we're all learning that WNBA, that's old school football, baby.
Yeah, no.
That is old school football.
Ball.
But I would like the media people that continue to say, this rookie class, this rookie class, this rookie class. Nah, just call it for what it is. There's one white for the Indiana team who is a superstar.
So now they're coming for his head for making these comments. And the story that I want to really get into here is this one. Listen to this. WNBA Mean Girls won't accept Caitlin Clark until she apologizes for being white and straight. Now, that's a piece by Bobby Burack, who's been on this program before. And I figured it's Pride Month, and with it being Pride Month and people being upset with Caitlin Clark because she is white and straight, why not have a conversation about that? So Bobby Burack is a columnist with Outkick.com. Bobby Burack, welcome back, sir.
Rich, I appreciate you having me.
My pleasure. So talk to me about this, and again, feel free to fill me in on all of the things I likely don't know.
Yes, I'll run down. Caitlin Clark is a basketball player who was drafted first overall in the WNBA. She set the all-time scoring record in college. She was statistically the greatest college basketball player ever, male or female. She's a phenomenon. She's fun to watch. 3-point ace. In the ratings for women's college basketball, hit record highs during her last year. She is one of the most popular athletes in the entire country. At Outkick, we write about most athletes, and nobody draws more attention than her. She's been in the WNBA since May, and she's been met with very toxic pushback from the other WNBA players, all of whom are black, most of whom are black lesbians. And why is that so important? Because that has been the topic of conversation, and the criticism that's been levied against Clark is that she's a beneficiary of white privilege, straight white privilege. We hear it all the time from ESPN, NBC Sports, all the outlets in between, New York Times. And what's happening to Clark, it's uncomfortable to watch. The women are slamming into her, hip-checking her, hard following her, going on Twitter and smearing her, sharing defamatory tweets about her. Very, very uncomfortable. And over the weekend, it continued. Hard fouls, slander, going on press conferences. And my point is, there's this argument that, well, they're just never going to forgive her for being straight and white because it's a predominantly black league, predominantly black lesbian league, and society preaches to those groups, hey, white people are the oppressors. They're the ones who oppressed you. They're your enemies. That's a very consequential phenomenon to tell young people of any race, of any sexuality, that somebody is their enemy. And it got me thinking, there is one way that Caitlin Clark can appease these race bullies, and that's the same way other straight white women in the WNBA have, and that is by coming out and apologizing for their white privilege and joining the black lesbian movement in the WNBA. Diana Taurasi, Cameron Brink just did that, and those women are fine with them. The reason that this is so newsworthy is one of the hosts at ESPN, a guy by the name of Amani Jones, said this, Rich. You can never be 100% sure a white person is not racist until they show you otherwise. Translation, the idea is, I'll call it the white derangement syndrome. The mind virus convinces you to look at white people as racist by default and don't accept them until they prove otherwise. See, Caitlin Clark has not proved yet that she's not a racist. She hasn't proved she is a racist, but by default, these women are preached and taught by society to view her as one.
Wow. Now, Bobby Burack, this is fascinating stuff because you've awakened the commentator in me. I don't care about the WNBA, but I do care about how society likes to view people and how they're singling this woman out for being white and straight. And it's just crazy. It's crazy. And this is coming from a brown guy that's straight, right? It's just the way that we're pitted into these things. I'm brown, you're white, she's white, this is that. This divide and conquer mentality, this oppressor versus the oppressed, is literally, I think, unmooring us as a society. And it seems to be getting worse. And now we're seeing it everywhere. And nobody seems to be, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few people, at least center left, seem to be picking up on the fact that this type of division is harmful. The ones that do realize it, I think, are the ones that are stoking it and promoting it and hoping to cause that type of division so they can create these little fiefdoms and leverage power. So what happens now with Caitlin Clark? And I think I'm guessing she's going to be garnering a lot of support from a lot of people because a lot of people are going to relate to that type of being singled out.
Well, I think she's going to cave, unfortunately. We saw her today somewhat cave, saying, no, you shouldn't be using my names to go after women of color, paraphrasing slightly. Don't use my name to push racism and sexism. So I think she's going to eventually cave. That's the way it works. white people in the public are inherently vulnerable to caving because due to racial double standards, and I'm not trying to be the victim here, but I think it's true, white people can't come out and say, hey, I am a victim of racism, I'm a victim of these women, because the media, society won't allow it. They won't let a white person do that. And her only choice is to either continue to be bullied or cave. And we've seen a lot of white public figures cave. Mark Cuban, Howard Stern, the author, Stephen King, how many actors, Robert De Niro. So I don't think that she will last as far as being this villain. I think she is going to bow to the race mob. And I hate to say that because she has an opportunity to actually push back. But Rich, she's just 22 years old. You know how hard that is for a 22-year-old to walk in a locker room with mostly gay black women who are told not to like her because she's straight and white. It's a hard position for a 22-year-old.
You know what's even harder is being 22 years old and making a crap ton of money and having this success in what is likely her dream and thinking, if I don't play ball with this mafia, I don't have my dream anymore. And that's got to be really difficult on her. Bobby Burack, stick with me because I like the direction you're going in. And I want to talk more about how there's bias, and the bias is always seemingly towards the center, towards the right, towards conservatives. If it's a conservative that is writing a book, they get blacklisted in one way or another, or there's a bias towards them. If somebody, even if they're not a conservative, if they're an athlete, they're straight and they're white, they're getting the short end of the stick. So I want to get your take on that when we return. Folks, we're on with Bobby Burack from Outkick.com. He writes about politics, and he does analysis on society and culture as well. And it's terrific. Make sure you subscribe to his column and you know exactly what's going on. Follow him on social media and don't go anywhere because we're coming right back.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. He's brown, he's bald, and he's breaking it down. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez.
To my liberal friends out there, all you're doing is showing that you're scared you can't beat them on the issues and the merits. That's why he keeps saying it's a political campaign against me. That's why he keeps saying they can't beat me at the election, at the polls. This is the only way they could do it. And if you don't put him in jail, and he still goes from being the presumptive GOP nominee to the official GOP nominee, and he goes to the polls, even though he was going to whine about winning and being rigged again, you have given more fodder to that argument, which means we'll never have peace in this country. Because tens of millions of people see what extent the other side is willing to go through just to keep him out of office because they can't beat him on their own merits. And they're going to say, hey, you trumped this up against him again, and we'll have no peace. When all you got to do is figure out a way to beat him on the issues. But you haven't been able to do it.
Now, that is our buddy Stephen A. Smith. He's been on this program before, and he said that back in April regarding the bias against the conservative candidate in the race, Donald Trump. Now, we're on with Bobby Burack from Outkick.com. And, Bobby, I want you to walk us through a little bit of your piece that you have up from a couple hours ago, where you speak about the New York Times bestseller list and the bias against conservatives that exists even there.
Yeah, John, do you have me here? The phone cut out there. Can you repeat that last part?
Yeah, I was saying your piece that you have on Outkick.com about the bias against conservatives, especially with regarding the New York Times bestseller list. It's not just there. It's kind of everywhere, as Stephen A. Smith just pointed out. But you pointed out specifically how it applies to books. Tell us more.
Yeah, so the economics put out a study this week looking into claims that the New York Times bestseller list operates with a political bias. And surprisingly, it was obvious they do. There are conservative books that outsell liberal books with supposedly conservative or liberal authors. I'm not sure who at the Times decided who is which, but they get ranked lower simply for being conservative. And you might say, who cares about the New York Times bestseller list? Well, fortunately, it does matter. A lot of publishers value putting that in the title. People still look at it and decide which books to buy. But it's so much deeper than just the New York Times bestseller list. And I linked to it in the article. I wrote a column last week. Rich, I don't know if you saw this. This story needs more attention. Mm-hmm. Internal documents recently leaked inside Google. Google has come out and confirmed the documents are leaked. Well, what did we find in those documents? According to some coding, Google manipulates websites on certain topics, particularly the election and COVID. What they do is they assign authority scores. Okay, so that means somebody at Google, an anonymous employee, some executive, we don't know who, nobody has any accountability, they decide, okay, this outlet is credible on the topic of the elections, this outlet's not, we're going to rank this one higher. And keep in mind, 99% of Google traffic comes on the first page. So if you put an article on page 2, nobody's finding it. Well, why is that so important? Because an all-sides study confirmed that 64% of stories placed atop Google are from a quote-unquote left-leaning outlet, compared to just 6% for conservative outlets. That's no coincidence. That's not an accident. Somebody at Google is deciding we're going to amplify these liberal outlets and we're going to bury these conservative outlets. Well, that is such a scary prospect because on a topic like COVID, because they believe you are conservative, you can't get your message out. And objectively, conservatives were more right during COVID than liberals. It wasn't even close. Same with the election. So we now know that Google, if you criticize Joe Biden or Hunter Biden in 2020, your article was placed lower than people who criticize Donald Trump. I find that to be something that is a violation of the distribution of information, because Google has all these protections because they claim that they are not a publisher but a platform, which means they can't be sued. Well, no. If they're making editorial decisions, that means that they are a publisher. And not only that, according to House Judiciary filings, the Biden administration has been in direct contact with several tech platforms. So if we find out Google is one of them, well, this is no longer a free company or a private. This is a state actor.
I'll go a step further, Bobby. I'd say it's no longer a free country when that happens. Bobby Burack, let everybody know how they can find you quickly.
Yeah, on X at Burack Bobby and Outkick.com.
You're the man, brother. Thanks for joining us tonight. You're a gentleman, a scholar, and a patriot, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Appreciate it.
You bet. Folks, don't go anywhere. I'm Rich Valdez. Coming right back.
Rich Valdez, who, again, will do a fine job, and I know you'll enjoy listening to him.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, amigos, welcome back, familia. We continue with our conversation. And despite the craziness that erupted at the congressional baseball game and the other news items of the day, to me, what's underscored here is the political divide. And there's always been a political divide, but it was once in vogue, it was once popular for us to exalt bipartisanship. And I think in recent years, we look at bipartisanship and we kind of blame everything on it. And we think, my goodness, that's part of the problem. And I don't think it's bipartisanship per se that's the problem. I think there's been a loss in our ability to have civil discourse. And even when we disagree vehemently, I think there's a degree of collegiality that's missing. Look no further than the intelligent and robust discussion between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jasmine Crockett that included Lauren Boebert in some ways a couple of weeks back, that had everything to do with one's body type, fake eyelashes, and the like. And they're not the only ones. That was just one that stood out in recent memory. But the political divide continues. And I want to speak with someone who is an authority on this issue. He's the professor of religion, culture, and social theory at the University of Virginia and executive director of the Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture at the aforementioned University of Virginia. And that's Professor James Davison Hunter. Now, he's got a new book, Democracy and Solidarity, on the cultural roots of America's political crisis. Professor, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Now, I noticed in looking at your bio that you've written a number of really interesting titles here. I think this one is right in line with what we're talking about: the death of character, moral education in an age without good or evil. And again, you wrote that almost a quarter century ago, and it probably, that topic is probably more true today than it's ever been. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. Yes, I would.
So let's talk about your new book, and maybe before we go, you could tell us a little about that, and maybe just compare and contrast what it was like when you wrote it to what it's like now. But what's the impetus for your current book, Democracy and Solidarity?
Well, about 3 decades ago, as a young scholar, I wrote and published a book called Culture Wars: The Struggle to Define America. And that was the book that introduced the concept of culture wars to public discourse. It was a book that was looking at the nature of political conflict in America, and some of the really remarkable changes that were taking place. For most of the 20th century, political conflict between the left and the right was mainly oriented along the axis of political economy. It was about the conflict between corporate interests and labor unions, between the management class and the working class, between the wealthy and the poor. And most of our political conflict revolved around that issue. But the last quarter of the 20th century, left and right began to organize conflict around cultural issues like abortion, sexuality, funding for controversial art by the National Endowment for the Arts, and even things like this 200th, the 500th celebration of Christopher Columbus. All sorts of issues that were being contested, and they were presented in the media as though they were discrete issues, but in fact, they were all woven together in a struggle to define the purposes of America's major institutions, and ultimately a struggle to define the meaning of America, what it's been, what it is, and where it's going. This book is the bookend. 3 decades later, I've been studying this, reading, working on it, and looking at the other side of the coin. In other words, looking at, not so much at polarization or faction, as the founders called it, but rather the unum, the glue, the adhesive, the thing that holds us together across our differences and in spite of our differences. What's happened to the glue that held us together? Why is it no longer having traction? And what does it mean?
Where do you think, and again, you've written a whole book on it, so difficult to answer in, in a quick soundbite of a minute, but where do you think we derailed here? Do you think that this push towards factions is, as I would believe, is part of a larger Marxist movement within our culture, within academia, to kind of divide and conquer and create these little fiefdoms, or is it something larger?
No, I think it's fundamentally different. It's not that there aren't that the factions have become really extreme and that they refuse to talk to each other. We could talk about that. I would argue more historically that the problem isn't faction per se. It's not polarization per se. We've always had conflict, disagreement, oftentimes vehement disagreement. The problem is that we lack the cultural resources to work through those disagreements to unity, to agreement, to compromise. It's really, that's the fundamental problem. We no longer possess the cultural glue and the resources that made it an adhesive in a society that's always been divided. And so what we end up with is just division. I can say more about that, but anyway.
Right, and I just want to make sure I get what you're saying. So if I hear you right, it sounds like the chasm has widened because we lack virtue and, more recently, even civility. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. The ethical dimension of our society is completely fractured, and there simply is no longer any kind of ethical agreement on the major public issues that divide us. Virtue means something completely different to any number of groups in our society. But it's not only that. It's our sense of reality and what's true, what's not true, what's real, what's not real. It's not just ethics. It's, to use a philosophical term, it's metaphysics and epistemology. In other words, all societies, whether they know it or not, make certain claims as to what's real, how we know what's real, who is a member of the community, and how we treat other members of our communities, and what's the point of it all? Is our society going? These fundamental, really proto-philosophical questions define every society, and we are divided all the way down on each one of those. So yes, the ethics certainly divided, but we live in a post-truth public world, and we can't even decide what's true anymore, at least in the public realm. And that obviously was really well illustrated by the pandemic. Was it real? Was it not real? Was it phony? Was it serious and life-threatening, or was it something we could safely ignore? There's still no agreement.
Professor, I'm going to take a quick pause here. We're going to come back and continue to pull on that thread because I think that's a great place to continue. The idea of relativism, has it taken over? What is truth? Who's defining it? Folks, we are on with James Davison Hunter. He is LaBrosse Levinson Distinguished Professor of Religion, Culture, and Social Theory at the University of Virginia, and we're discussing his book, Democracy and Solidarity, and we're coming right back.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
Mr. Call Screener, who is a budding radio star, by the way. Richie Valdez is terrific.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, amigos, welcome back. We continue our conversation with Professor James Davison Hunter on his book, Democracy and Solidarity. And we left off with the notion that while ethics in the country has been compromised, if you will, there's more to it, including what is truth, and is it a question of relativism taking over I'm guessing there's more to it. Professor, take it away.
Well, I think, again, the nation has always been divided, but as the national motto affirms, there is one out of many. And that is not only a description, even more so, it was an aspiration. The founders understood that there would always be disagreement, there would always be faction, but in spite of that, there would be a unity. Again, it was probably more of an aspiration, and an aspiration that would meet new challenges as the years went on. Obviously, we're a very different society than we were 250 years ago. Far more complex, far more diverse than we've ever been. And the question is, what is it now that holds us together? In the founding period, the great democratic revolutions of Western Europe and North America were the offspring of what is called the Enlightenment. But in America, it was a hybrid Enlightenment. It not only drew from secular science and the scientific revolution, it also drew from Calvinism and a number of other sources. It was a hybrid Enlightenment. And in spite of the differences, I mean, say, illustrated between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, differences that were really quite deep, there was nevertheless the sense that there was a common project operating from a common understanding of what's real, of the ethics that would bind them together. An illustration of that, of course, is Jefferson's Bible, where he stripped out all of the supernatural elements of the Gospels, and he said, listen, I have no taste whatsoever for the dogmas of Christianity, but the ethics of Christianity I support wholeheartedly. So again, in spite of the differences, political differences, policy differences, there was an ethical unity and a belief in reason and so on. Those cultural sources are now exhausted. We no longer have those resources to draw upon. And as a consequence, we no longer have the cultural resources to work through our differences. And I can say more about those differences because
I just wanted to follow up with you because I agree with everything you're saying, and I think it's really well put. It's very eloquent. I guess my question is, do you feel that the cultural resources that we once had, or this commonality that we once shared, were perhaps patriotism, a love of country, despite our disagreements on what the country is and should be, could one of those cultural resources that we drew from be a belief in a common deity or Christianity that kind of brought us together, where I feel maybe we've gotten away from that? What are your thoughts on those aspects?
Well, I think that's right. Religion, there was never, of course, as you know, a formal establishment of Christianity or of religion in the United States, unlike many of the European states that had a formal establishment of religion. But we did have a formal and informal establishment. In other words, within government and within law and politics, there was never a state church. But within the political culture, America was largely Christian. And part of the story that I tell in this book is about the contradictions that were present at the time of the founding, really fundamental contradictions. We declared that all men are free, but then denied people freedom. We declared all people equal. We declared that we would promise universal justice, but denied these things. So when Catholics came, obviously the most egregious case of this is with race, but it extended religion as well. The 19th century one can't understand it without understanding anti-Catholicism, and later in the 19th century, anti-Semitism. So as the nation has become more diverse, we have had to work through these contradictions again and again and again, drawing on the resources of the hybrid Enlightenment. And those resources have evolved and changed. They look different now than they did in the past, but they were still recognizable with the past. There was still this thread of continuity. That thread of continuity no longer exists, in my view, at least in our political culture.
James Davison Hunter, professor at the University of Virginia. We're going to continue. When we come back, I'd like you to make your best presentation of why people need to get the book and what the big takeaway is going to be when they get a copy of the book. Folks, the book is Democracy and Solidarity on the Cultural Roots of America's Political Crisis. Our guest is James Davison Hunter, and we're coming right back.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
All right, America, welcome back. And we continue with James Davison Hunter, professor of religion, culture, and social theory at the University of Virginia, discussing his book, Democracy and Solidarity. Now, Professor, for those that are listening, I always encourage them to get 2 copies of the book, one for themselves, one to give away. Sounds like an amazing read, chock full of historical context and analysis to help us understand how we got to this place. What is the grand takeaway that you'd like them to have?
Well, look, I think that liberal democracy, for all of its faults and problems, is one of the great achievements of human history. And I believe that democracy, in fact, is the political form of the humane ideal.
Right.
And to deal with the crisis of democracy today, we have to understand it rightly and well. We need to take the full measure of the crisis. And right now, we're not doing that. We think that the problem is the other side. We think that the problem can be fixed with this policy or that policy. And we are naive and deluding ourselves unless we understand the complexity of the problem, which has deep roots, but are playing out in the present in ways that really do threaten the not only the vitality of democracy in America, but also its very existence. So this book is intended as an attempt to defend.
A last-ditch effort to save the nation. Professor, I want to thank you for being with us. Folks, get a copy of the book. James Davison Hunter, you are a gentleman, a scholar, and a patriot, and I want to thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You bet. All right, amigos, straight ahead, it's Open Phone America. Plus, we've got a lot. Funny Willis and more. Don't go anywhere. I'm Rich Valdez.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez, America's favorite late-night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media. Welcome to hour number 3 of the program. It is Thursday night, live from New York. Happy to be with you. Our phone number, if you want to join us on our late night national town hall conversation, 833-482-5337-8334-Valdez. And this third hour of the show, we call it Open Phone America. No guest interviews in the third hour, just you, the listeners of this program, millions of you across the country from one coast to the next, and even some international callers that we have every now and again. And I'm grateful to be here. I opened up the show talking about my my feeling of gratitude today. I am very grateful to be here, very grateful to do this work and to have wonderful listeners like you all. I'm super appreciative of it. And overall, forget just being grateful for my job. There's so many things in life I think that we can be grateful for, and sometimes we lose track. And that's really not the direction I want to go in, but just something I wanted to mention because I feel like sometimes we get so caught up in life. At least I do, right? And for those of you listening in the middle of the country, God bless you, right? It's so nice in places that are not New York and maybe not California because we have this built-in rush that we're always in. We're always in some sort of rush, even if we're not. And it causes a short-temperedness where it's, you're just kind of always on edge, always ready. It's always go time. It's always, forget the shoving match. Let's get straight to the fight. And that's just part of how life is in New York, I feel. But not everybody is like that. There are some people that are smelling the lilies and the daisies. They're enjoying life. They're enjoying the journey. It's not about the destination. It's about how you get there. And I took a moment today to remind myself to always look at the glass as half empty. Now, it doesn't mean I always do it, but it's a good thing to do. And I recommend it to each of you. Anyway, there's a bunch of things I want to get to tonight in this hour. And a bunch of things we've talked about already, right? So we talked about the political divide in our country with the professor. That was a very enlightening discussion that I really enjoyed. We talked about the latest controversy in sports with Bobby Burack. He outlined what's going on with the WNBA player, Caitlin Clark. And that was an interesting story. And we also had a very, very good conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Grady, who told us about the American dream, his story of becoming a pilot and why he ran for office. And it just really just a remarkable story overall that I thought was terrific. A black guy who grew up in the Jim Crow South and parents made it, traveled the world, then became a pilot, and spent 40 years flying. I mean, just an amazing story. But I want to get to your calls as well, 833-482-5337, and these topics, all right? We have the topic, we've got Biden meeting with the G7 leaders. I'll get to some of the audio on that. We also have Trump meeting with Congress in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. We have the Supreme Court that unanimously ruled against all of the efforts to stop the abortion pill. And of course, Funny Willis. We've got Funny Willis's boyfriend, her man's, as we say on the street. Her man's, Nathan Wade, was in an interview and decided that he was going to just do a timeout, and he walks away. It's remarkable, honestly. And we'll get to that in a moment as well. But I want to start off, I guess we'll start off with a little bit of this this case from the Supreme Court. And I think we have a little bit of audio on that. Just bear with me while I find it on my list. And we've got, let's see, we've got Representative Zoe Lofgren. She's a Democrat from California, and she was on MSNBC earlier today saying that the Supreme Court abortion pill ruling doesn't mean that the women of America are free. Listen to this.
Kind of wondering, why did they take this made-up case to begin with? This was a made-up case for an agenda, and it was bizarre that they took it. And I think, obviously, it was a hot potato. Now they've gotten rid of it. But it doesn't mean that the women of America are free. As we know, Donald Trump recently celebrated the overturning of Roe v. Wade as a beautiful decision. And so he really is in favor of the federal government deciding these very personal decisions for women and their families across the United States. We have a lot of risk right now, and that's not over.
Again, that is Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, also known as Zoe Lofgren, Democrat from California, on MSNBC, sharing her displeasure, right? Her displeasure for the win that really just left it alone. People can still get the abortion pill. People are going to still continue to cross state lines and do what they're doing and order this pill. And that's what it is, and that's where it's been. And no change. And the reason why, the doctors that brought this suit saying that they didn't want to be involved in this, and the administration of this, whatever it was found that they did not have standing to bring the case. At least that was the court's finding. So they did not bring the case, and they didn't hear the case. Now, this, of course, is going to upset some. It's going to make others happy. That's the environment we live in. And I think the good professor pointed that out in his remarks as well. So let's go to your calls. 833-482-5337 or 833-4-VALDEZ. And let's check in with Joe. Joe's in Salem, Arkansas on KSAR. Joe, go right ahead.
Rich, before I make an opinion, I want to know what happened to our majority conservative pro-life court that Trump set up. Even Miss Amy there, I can't believe they discussed me. They're all voted to let the pill go on and kill these embryos.
Well, I think part of this really, and again, from what I've seen, and let me see if I can pull up what I was looking at earlier, because I think the issue here is a simple one. It's a legal one. The court says that there's a group of doctors that did not have the legal standing to challenge the FDA's regulation of this drug, which causes pregnant women to have an abortion. Now, this was a big thing, and we discussed it with one of the lawyers from Heritage, Sarah Parshall-Perry, and she's a pro-life advocate, but she herself said that she wasn't sure how this was going to go because she felt that she wasn't sure how the court would rule on this, being that there was an uncertainty on if they, in fact, had standing. I don't know how that determination is made, but I do know this was something that the lawyers were concerned about going into it. So I'm going to, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say they put their best foot forward on this case as best as they could to try and take their shot, shoot their shot. And it wasn't enough. It doesn't mean that they can't bring it again in the best way. Think about it this way. Look at how many times people have tried to challenge Roe versus Wade as bad law. And a lot of people agreed that it was bad law. There was even comments from Ruth Bader Ginsburg on that. However, 50 years went by before they actually took a case. Now, I'm sure some of it had to do with activism and the makeup of the court. But I think ultimately they were looking for the right angle, right? The right case that was a real constitutional question that the court needed to really answer. And I think this case may not have risen to that occasion. Now, it may have been political, but I feel that because you have so many people that are trying to do the right thing on the Supreme Court, whether they agree or not, they're trying to interpret the law honestly and fairly. I think that is what the only thing we can hold on to is that. And we've seen them do it time and again. It doesn't mean they're going to get it right every time. This time is one of those times they didn't get it right, in my opinion. However, that doesn't mean that we can't look at the mechanics of it and figure out how to approach this better in the future. And we've seen this on multiple fronts when it comes to bringing legal cases. Sometimes they work. Sometimes you got to go back, tweak them, fine-tune it a little bit, and bring it back in a different way to get the desired result that you're looking for. So that's my thought on that. But, Joe, go right ahead.
Okay, I get all that. I listen to you carefully, and I can kind of contemplate some of that. However, that court is up there to do good, and they need to give standing to the embryo, which that's life at conception. Now, are you aware of RU 486 that they tried to get in here, the pink pill from Europe?
No.
Well, anyway, it's a pink pill, and the pro-life people fought that, and for now it's not here. But the question of RU 486, that's a question. Are you for 86ing? And the mafia use that all the time. Go out and 86 this guy and so on. And when I worked at Burger Chef in St. Louis, which competed with Burger King, they're out of business now. The manager told me, he says, "No, when you work the counter in the front and everything, when they change their mind midway in an order, you hit 8 and 6. That's 86. And all cash registers, that deletes that order, and you can start over again." So
I'm just looking at
there's
something.
a lot of symbology going on.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say the drug that was in question today, I think that's the code you just gave me. This RU 486 is the same as what was ruled on today. And again, whether they weren't ruling on the pill itself, they were ruling on whether these doctors that brought the case were able to challenge the FDA's determination of how it gets administered. So I learned something new. RU 486 is also known as mifepristone. Anyway, I got to take a quick pause right here. Joe in Salem, Arkansas, thank you so much for your call. KSAR, everybody there, shout out to you guys. We're coming right back. We continue our discussion on all of the news of the day and your calls. 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
I want to listen to you, Rich, all the time.
America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
What the WNBA currently has is what we like to describe as a cash cow. There is a superstar. And we're not saying that the players on the court need to act any differently. That's the athletes are going to do what athletes are going to do in any sport. And I think we're all learning that WNBA, that's old school football, baby. That is old school football. But I would like the media people that continue to say, this rookie class, this rookie class, this rookie class. Nah, just call it for what it is. There's one white for the Indiana team who is a superstar.
And that is the audio clip that we were talking about earlier, where Caitlin Clark, the WNBA player, is referred to as a white B word on the radio program hosted by Pat McAfee. And he's taken some heat over calling her that. Of course, Bobby Burack joined us. He wrote a piece saying that the only thing she's guilty of is being white and straight in a largely lesbian and African-American dominated league. So interesting to see how these things play out. She does very well with her endorsements, despite not making a ton on her contract. But that's, I think how many athletes make their living. But anyway, I want to get your thoughts on that. I want to go to Keokuk, Iowa. I'm pretty sure I said that wrong, but if I didn't, great for me. Let's check in with Donna on KOKX. Donna, go right ahead. You're on with Rich Valdez. Welcome.
Okay. I want to mention the fact that I was a Jim Bohannon fan, even listened to him when he filled in for Larry King.
Wow.
But, so I've been listening a long time. I'm an Iowa Hawkeye fan. I'm an Iowa Hawkeye fan, and I have watched Caitlin Clark and the rest of the girls they fill the stadium up at Carver Hawkeye Arena because of her and the other girls. It was just great. And you got to figure she's only 22 years old and all the heat that she's taken. But I've seen her sit there and sign autographs for these young girls and give them shoes with her name on it. And she's made a lot of fans in Iowa. And she's a class act. She's filled the stadiums at WNBA. And I think these girls that are reaping all the assets from that ought to be looking at that as well.
Yeah, listen, I'm not going to argue with you on that point. I think that you make a solid point there. And what I find interesting here is just how what the professor was talking about earlier, right? How we've kind of lost our way, and not just with virtue, and not just with a lot of things. But again, my opinion of that is we've lost our way with a common love of our fellow man, because we've kind of largely gotten away from religiosity and gone towards agnosticism or atheism. There's a big push for that. And that doesn't mean that every atheist is a godless, amoral, immoral person. No. But it also doesn't mean that every agnostic or atheist out there is a decent, human-loving person. Doesn't mean that either. And I think that's evidenced by just look around. You look around at so many of our large cities, and you see how crime remains out of control, and how it's not just, we're breaking into your car because, or like AOC would say, all out crazy herself, that they're stealing screen TVs to feed their families because they need a loaf of bread. No, I mean, we're talking about violent crime where people are shooting one another. Earlier today, and I don't mean to get off too far here, but I saw this crazy, crazy video of a woman who was charged with murder for stuffing her boyfriend she tricks him to get into a luggage, a large piece of luggage, and then he suffocated in there and died. And she left him in there on purpose. She wanted to kill him. I mean, just the things that I'm seeing I'd never seen in my life. And we have this hatred that seems to permeate our society. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head. That's what we're seeing. There's a love of Caitlin Clark, and that's why people fill the stadiums. And there's a hatred of her as well, Donna, that I think is not just of her. I think it's of a hatred towards America, a hatred towards God, and ultimately a hatred towards things we disagree with. And there isn't an openness to have that acceptance or dialogue, Donna.
Well, it's too bad, but we got so many things but I think that's one thing that we can put a positive on, the way she's acted and carried herself in the college and in the WNBA. So,
well, thank you for your thoughts, for your listenership, and for your call. I appreciate you listening to Larry King and the late, great Jim Bohannon, and, of course, sticking around with me. It's a real pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much, Donna, in Keokuk, Iowa, KOKX. Folks, we're coming right back. We continue Open Phone America. Don't go anywhere. I'm Rich Valdez.
Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
All right, amigos, welcome back. We continue with our conversation tonight with you all, the American people. 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ is the phone number. I was talking about gratitude earlier, and Paul in Boise wants to weigh in on that. Paul, go right ahead. Big shout out to KBOI.
Thank you very much, Rich.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was taught at the age of my new life by a man that said that you start a list, come up with 5 things that you're grateful for, take that sticky note, put it on the mirror next to where you're going to be looking when you shave, and you learn that, and then you build that list until it gets to the point where it's too long and you can't do anything else with it except keep it stuck up there to the mirror. and know that, you know, the two men that I'm most grateful for in my life, not my parents, obviously, they would be the top, but the other two, one was William Wilson from New York City, who was a stockbroker, and he started a
Did he make you a lot of money?
No, he didn't make me a lot of money. He saved my life is what he did. He and another man. And between the two of them, they gave me a life worth living, and that I'm truly grateful for because I have it. There was a time when it wasn't working out for me. Let's just put it that way. And, you know, between those two men, they started a deal called Alcoholics Anonymous, and they just had their 89th anniversary.
Wow.
And it's worked for over 4.5 million people, and it's saved that many lives. Some go back out again, but for the most part, 4.5 million people have been helped by it. And
well, God bless you, Paul. That's quite a story.
Yeah. Anyway, I appreciate you, and especially the men that work for you each and every night. You guys do a bang-up job. You keep me thinking about something other than myself, which is probably the worst thing for me to think about. And I enjoy your show immensely, and I like to be known as a regular because I enjoy the show, and that's why I keep coming
you're
back.
Definitely a regular, and I thank you for listening, Paul. I really do appreciate it and your kind words, and again, Godspeed to you. Congratulations on your sobriety, and I'm glad to hear that you're grateful for the show. It means a lot to me and to the team. Thank you, sir. Godspeed to you. And we continue. With Mike. Mike is in Cleveland, Ohio on WNIR. Mike, go right ahead.
Well, my opinion is, especially Supreme Court justices making decisions about a woman, if it's my family, my relatives and my family, Rich, I want, it's up to them what they do with themselves, their bodies, and anything else that God's given them, not some guys in a position that they can think that they're playing. In my opinion, it's almost, they get this head that they're God. They're not gods. They're just men, flesh and blood, and they're not God. God makes the ultimate decisions of this world, in my opinion, and he hasn't lost yet, and he don't need to be voted in, and he is God. But as far as the crime, I blame Hollywood, trash movies, trash music that's been happening in this country. They've taken and everything's got to be some sort of a dramatization of crime where they're almost trying to make it good, okay? And I just don't even have a television.
Yeah. Well, Mike, let me, thank you for your comment. And what I'll say is, if I use the same logic that you've given me, that the Supreme Court justices are not gods, I think that's probably, I put myself in their shoes. If I had the job of deciding Roe versus Wade, I think I would have to do it based on the merit of the law, right? Is this a meritorious case? Is it good law? Is it a good decision based on the interpretation that we have of the law and this case? And I think the case had been made for a long time that it was a very political case in many ways, where it argued certain things and the outcome was something different, right? They were arguing about viability, but ultimately it opened up the door way beyond that. And that's why it was overturned, because I think it was a poorly argued case that they kind of felt they had to decide that way on. Now, putting that aside, the question of one playing God, just imagine how, at least how I would feel if someone were to tell me, as a judge, as a Supreme Court justice, are you willing to say that a child that's in a womb, an unborn child that for my intent and purpose, I'm going to say was placed there by God, right? Not immaculate conception, but I believe children come from God. So if there's a child in a womb, who is there to defend this child's right to live, this child's right to do anything if they can't speak? And the only person that could advocate on behalf of this child would be their mother and father. And their mother and father are advocating to terminate that child's life. In my opinion, the court has no option but to say, I'm not going to play God and allow the mom to just go ahead and kill this child. I have a responsibility to defend this child's right, this child's right to live, this child's right to grow, this child's right to have a voice, even though they're voiceless because they're growing inside of the mother. And to me, that is the role that the court has, and that's why the court decided the way they did. So I think the exact opposite, honestly. I think I would be playing God if I said, no, I'm going to let your mom decide whether you live or die. I'm going to let anybody else but you. I'm going to take away your right to your autonomous agency to this fetus, to the child, and in the womb. And ultimately, that's the case. Now, I understand people make it about women should choose, but I just don't think so. I don't think that me as a dad, I don't have the right to say, you know what? People joke around like that, right? And they say, I brought you into this world, kid, I'll take you out. But in reality, that's not true. You know, we can't go ahead and yell at our kid or kill our kid if they defy us. We can't do that. And I don't think we should be able to do it when they're in the womb. There's a reality of life that when you have sex, that's the process of making a baby, irrespective of the pleasure that it may cause you. So I think it's responsible adulthood to say you're going to do this the right way, and you're not going to use abortion as some sort of contraceptive. You're not going to use the Plan B pill. You're not going to use the abortion pill because you've decided to be irresponsible in your lovemaking, right? That's just my opinion of it. I think don't do it. Get married, do it, and have a kid. Don't want to have a kid? Don't have a kid. But don't do something that leads to having a kid and then trying to clean up a quote-unquote mistake that you've made doesn't mean that it's a mistake that God made. That's my thought on it. And ultimately, I think the court has the responsibility to defend this child because no one else is going to, especially if the mother is deciding on their behalf. We would never allow a mother of a kindergartner to say, you know, I decided my kid, you know, they've lived long enough. 3 years old we're out of here, right? Those people go to jail for murder, and this is the standard. We've dehumanized fetuses. We've taken the emotion out of it by trying to make it sound clinical. The reality is that's a child growing inside of a woman, and just because it's growing in your body doesn't mean you have the right. I mean, if this were a bald eagle growing a nest in your backyard, do you have the right to move it? In most places you can't because it's your property, but they're endangered species, so there's a protection of these animals. If they're going to protect a bird, surely we can protect the child. Mike in Cleveland, Ohio, thank you for your call, WNIR. The other point that Mike made that I'll just speak briefly to is I'm of the opinion that art imitates life. I'm all in favor of art. So actors, rappers, singers, you name it. If you grow up in a tough neighborhood and you see things a certain way and you want to call it out in poetry, in song, in prose, in acting, however you want, go right ahead. Right? In many ways, that's what I do. I'm not acting per se, but I'm using the platform that I have to share my thoughts, my musings on life. And actors are no different. Songmakers are no different. So I think whether I agree with them or not is a different story. But that's free speech. If they want to talk about FTP, F the police, I don't like it, but that's their right. And I think we can blame the influence that entertainment has on certain people. I get it. I hear it all the time. I just don't know. I grew up in that era. I grew up listening to songs from Public Enemy, which were, I'm going to say, very left-leaning, KRS-One, talking about how, again, just anti-police rhetoric. And my brothers were cops. I admired what they did. I went to an abbreviated police academy to become a volunteer cop in the town I lived in. And I can tell you I've got nothing but respect for the police. Now, if a cop, a singular cop, is acting as a bad actor, then yeah, we call out the bad behavior for what it is. But by and large, I'm not going to indict an entire profession of people that I believe are there to do the right thing. So that's my thought on that. I think art will always imitate life, and it's up to us whether we want to consume it or not. Thank you for your call again, my friend. Folks, we're coming right back with the rest of your calls. We got calls from California, from Montana, and more coming in. 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. Voted best head of hair in live late night radio 6 years in a row. It's Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
All right, America, welcome back. And of course, I love doing late night radio because I don't want to say anything goes, but lots of things go. And of course, I'm always happy to entertain a couple of conspiracy theories and either agree or debunk. And I think we might have one on our hands here. Let's go to Ventura, California, KVTA, and check in with Archie. Archie, go right ahead. You're on with Rich Valdez. Welcome.
Thank you for taking my call, Rich. I agree 100% with your statement about the sanctity of human life. Those infants are innocent blood, and it should not be shed. But with regard to what I called about originally, there were some Tajiks, some people from Tajikistan were arrested on both coasts. And I remember from the COVID discussion early when the outbreak, they were talking about COVID labs in China. They also talked about a lab for the enhancement of pathogens in Tajikistan. And it was said that the next virus or pathogen would be from there and would target younger people and children. And that bothered me a lot. And I called because I thought that would probably make the hair on your neck stand up as it did mine.
Yeah, well, listen, Archie, the first thing I'll say is I don't put anything past anybody. And I think the reality that we saw in with COVID, right, was that we were told that it was from a bat, from a wet market, and it jumped from this bat to a human. And we know today, at least, again, I'm comfortable in believing the idea that most people have, Redfield, the head of the CDC, and others have said, well, we're not going to rule out the lab leak theory. But everybody that I've interviewed that is a scientist and a professional in this field of immunology or public health, they've all agreed with me in saying, yeah, sure, this is likely a lab leak. There's really no other real explanation for it other than that one. Everything else is kind of like pseudoscience. So I get that. I agree. Now, just the same way there was a virus that was made intentionally more lethal through this idea of gain of function research at a lab in Wuhan, China, called the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This is no secret, right? This is what they did. I think the same holds true for what you're saying, right? There are obviously labs all over the place with lots of things happening. And there's funding for these things from all sorts of places. Dr. Fauci infamously said, no, we did not fund gain of function research in Wuhan. And I guess technically he believes that's true because he funded the gain of function. The money came through funding from his organization to an Echo Health Alliance, who then turned around and funded that research work, what they call research work, in the Wuhan Institute. So, you put a couple of pass-throughs, basically, I'm going to use the word, you launder the money a little bit, and voila, you've got yourself plausible deniability, and you can make viruses that kill people. So finding these new terrorists, I understand. Anything could happen. I don't know for a fact that any of that stuff is happening, but I don't for a second doubt that it could happen. I'm not going to say, there's no way that could happen. Sure, there's way that could happen. There's plenty of way that could happen. And that's just the reality of life. So, yeah, I'm with you, whether it's Tajikistan or any other stan. There's a lot of enemies of our country, and there are a lot of people that would love to see things go wrong here in the United States, in particular for, young people, elderly, the infirmed, whomever. Everybody has a different motivation, and that one is no different. Archie, I want to thank you for your call and your kind words. KVTA. Coming back, we've got the speed round. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, amigos, we continue. It's the speed round. Let's go to Kalispell, Montana, KOFI. Lance, go right ahead quickly.
Good evening, sir. Hey, thank you for playing chess when so many in your medium are playing checkers. That being said, I think there's a move on the board that everybody's dancing around the edges of but hasn't quite touched upon yet. That being all the illegal immigration, Joe Biden being the pretender-in-chief. 9/11 situation could enact a declaration of martial law, and with a couple of squishy Republicans in the House being on the other side, and Kamala Harris being the tiebreaker in the Senate, we might have a suspended federal election if...
All right, Lance, now let's talk about this. When in the history, 248 years of America, have we ever had a suspended federal election? The answer, never. Why? Because the United States Constitution calls for the election to be held on that specific day. That's the reason it's on that particular Tuesday every 4 years. It's an impossibility as a matter of constitutional law. That's impossibility as a matter of constitutional law. There's no historical precedent for it. So at this point, it's just conjecture that we would say, well, it could happen. Yeah, sure, it could. But if I had to bet, I would bet on the 248 years where we've always had an election. Lance, thanks for the call. Shout out to KOFI. Let's go to Andrea, Prentice, Mississippi, with seconds to go. It's not fair to you, but go ahead quickly.
I think we all need to respect and teach about the sanctity of human life. These things should be taught in families and values.
Okay, they're going to cut you off. Get to the point.
But the only choices are before the fact.
All right. Abortion should be legal is what I think you're saying. I think it is legal in many states, and we've allowed the states to decide. That's what the Supreme Court decided. Folks, hasta mañana, hasta la próxima. Take care. Good night. God bless. I'm Rich Valdez.